Before you read any further, pause for just a moment. Take one slow breath in, and let it out, slower than you took it in. Not because something is wrong. Simply because what I want to say to you needs a quiet place to land, and your mind, right now, is probably busier than your heart is. Your heart already knows something. It has known it for a while now. We are simply going to sit here together, long enough for you to hear it too. There is a difference between knowing something with your mind, and knowing something with your heart, and I think you have felt that difference before, even if you never named it clearly. The mind knows through analysis, weighing evidence, comparing options, building a case one reason at a time. The heart knows differently. It knows the way you know a room is cold, before you check the thermostat, the way you know a person is upset, before they say a word. It knows early. And it knows quietly, and it very rarely announces itself the way the mind does, with confidence and explanation. It simply sits there, steady, waiting for you to stop long enough to notice it. Somewhere in your life right now, there is a truth your heart has already settled on, even while your mind continues turning it over, examining it from every angle, looking for more evidence before it's willing to agree. This is not unusual. This is, in fact, how it almost always goes. The heart tends to arrive first. The mind, cautious by nature, likes to arrive later, once it feels it has done its due diligence. There is nothing wrong with that order. But I want you to notice, gently, where you actually are in that order right now, on whatever matter has been quietly occupying you these past days or weeks. Think of the question sitting underneath your daily life right now, the one you keep returning to in quiet moments. The one that surfaces when you're driving alone, or lying awake a little longer than you meant to, or washing dishes without really thinking about the dishes at all. You know the one I mean. Maybe it's about a relationship, whether to stay, whether to leave, whether to finally say the thing you've been holding back. Maybe it's about work, whether this path is actually yours, or one you've simply continued out of momentum. Maybe it's about a decision that seems small on the surface, but somehow keeps returning to your mind with a weight that doesn't match its apparent size. Whatever it is, your heart has an answer to it already. I want to help you find your way back to that answer. Let's start simply, because the heart does not respond well to complexity. Close your eyes for a moment, right where you are, and let the question rise in your mind without immediately trying to answer it. Just let it sit there. Notice what happens in your body as it does. Does your chest feel tight, or does it feel open? Does your breathing get shallow, or does it stay easy? Does something in you brace, the way a body braces before impact, or does something in you soften, the way a body softens when it feels safe? These physical responses are not incidental. They are often the most honest information you have. Arriving before your mind has had the chance to edit it into something more socially acceptable, or more logically defensible. I want to explain why this matters, because I think it's easy to dismiss bodily sensation as unreliable, something too vague to trust with an important decision. But consider how the body actually works. It has been receiving information about the people and situations in your life for as long as you've known them, subtle cues, patterns, inconsistencies. Small moments of safety or unease that your conscious mind never had time to fully process and catalog. All of that accumulated information doesn't disappear just because your mind didn't consciously register it. It gets stored somewhere else, in the part of you that responds physically before it responds verbally. That is often exactly what you are feeling when your chest tightens around a certain thought, or eases around another. Not superstition. Just accumulated evidence. Processed by a part of you faster and more completely than your conscious reasoning ever could. So when I say your heart may already know the truth, I don't mean this in some vague, mystical sense divorced from anything real. I mean it quite literally. Your body has been quietly gathering data on this situation for longer than you've been consciously trying to solve it, and some of that data has already resolved into a felt sense of clarity. Even if your mind hasn't caught up to articulate it in words yet. The work now isn't to find new information. It's to quiet down enough, to hear the conclusion that's already been reached. I want to walk you through why this can feel so difficult, because knowing the heart has an answer doesn't automatically make that answer easy to access. Mostly, the difficulty comes from fear of what the answer might actually be. If some part of you already suspects the truth is uncomfortable, that a relationship needs to end, that a decision needs to be reversed, that a fear needs to be faced rather than avoided, then some part of you also has a strong incentive to keep that truth quiet, buried under noise, distraction, and endless additional analysis that never quite arrives at a conclusion. The mind, in these moments, isn't actually seeking clarity. It's stalling, because clarity would require action, and action, especially difficult action, is something we are wired to delay for as long as possible. If this describes you right now, if you've been circling the same question for weeks or months without landing anywhere, consider gently whether the circling itself has become the point. Sometimes we keep asking a question not because we don't know the answer, but because asking keeps us safely in the realm of consideration rather than the harder realm of decision. There is a kind of comfort, strange as it sounds, in perpetual uncertainty. It postpones the discomfort of choosing. But it also postpones everything that choosing would make possible. I want you to try something simple, right now, with whatever question has been sitting with you. Imagine, just for a moment, that the answer is already decided, not by you, not today, but somewhere deep inside you, days or weeks ago. Imagine that all that's left is for you to discover what that decision already is. The way you might discover the ending of a story that's already been written rather than invent one from nothing. Notice how that framing feels different from the anxious, effortful feeling of trying to figure something out from scratch. There's a kind of relief in it, because you're no longer solving. You're simply remembering something you already, quietly, know. Ask yourself this, gently, without rushing to answer, if you had to decide in the next 10 seconds. With no more time to deliberate, what would you choose? Don't reason your way to the answer. Just notice what rises first, before your mind has time to complicate it with pros and cons. That first, unguarded response is usually closer to your heart's actual position than anything you'd construct after careful deliberation. The deliberation, more often than not, is where doubt gets manufactured, not where truth gets discovered. I think it's worth naming, too, why we so often distrust this kind of immediate, felt knowing, even when it turns out to be right far more often than we give it credit for. We've been taught, in most parts of life, that careful, rational analysis is the only respectable way to arrive at a decision, and that anything faster or less explainable is somehow less valid. But consider how many of your best decisions in life were actually made this way, quickly, intuitively. Confirmed by reasoning afterward rather than preceded by it. And consider, too, how many of your most regretted decisions came from overanalysis, from talking yourself out of an instinct that turned out, later, to have been correct all along. There's a particular kind of self-doubt that develops when someone has been wrong about their gut feelings before, and I want to address that honestly, because I don't want to oversimplify this. If you've trusted your instincts in the past and been badly hurt by where they led you, it makes complete sense that you'd be cautious about trusting them again now. That caution isn't a flaw. But it's worth distinguishing between instinct that was genuinely wrong, and instinct that was actually right, but got overridden by wishful thinking, fear, or the influence of people around you who had their own reasons for wanting you to decide differently. Often, when people look back honestly at moments their gut feeling led them astray, what actually happened wasn't that the instinct was wrong. It was that the instinct was ignored, talked over, or drowned out by something louder. I want you to consider, now, what has been drowning out your own instinct on this particular question. Is it the opinion of someone close to you, someone whose judgment you trust but whose perspective may not actually account for everything you're feeling? Is it fear of what changing course would cost you, time already invested, comfort already established, a story about yourself you'd have to revise if you admitted the truth? Is it simply the exhaustion of having thought about this for so long that you've started to distrust your own perception of it entirely, the way a word starts to look strange if you stare at it too long? Whatever it is, naming it clearly tends to loosen its grip, even slightly. Let's return to the body again, because I think it holds more of the answer than the mind is usually willing to credit it with. Think about the specific situation in question, and notice, honestly, whether your body feels expansive or contracted when you imagine each possible path forward. Expansion tends to feel like more room to breathe, a loosening in the chest, a sense, even faint, of relief. Contraction tends to feel like tightness, a bracing. A kind of low-grade dread that doesn't fully explain itself but is unmistakably there. These sensations aren't infallible, but they are data, and they are usually more honest than the story your mind tells about why a particular choice makes sense on paper. I want to offer a small, practical exercise here, because I think abstract reassurance alone isn't quite enough for a question this real. Write down the decision you're facing, in plain, simple language, as if explaining it to someone who knows nothing about your situation. Then write 2 short endings to that sentence, one describing what happens if you follow the path your mind has been arguing for, and one describing what happens if you follow the path your gut has been quietly leaning toward instead. Read both endings out loud, if you can, in a quiet moment when no one is listening. Notice which one makes your shoulders drop, and which one makes them rise toward your ears. The body rarely lies about this, even when the mind still has objections it once heard. I also want to gently address the fear that trusting your heart in this moment means abandoning reason altogether, becoming reckless or impulsive in a way that ignores real, practical considerations. That isn't what I'm suggesting. Reason matters. Practical considerations matter. But reason works best when it's in conversation with the heart's knowing, not when it's used to override or silence it entirely. The healthiest decisions usually come from both, an intuitive sense of what's true, tested and refined by careful thought, rather than either one operating completely alone, deaf to the other. I want to spend a little more time on why the mind so often disagrees with the heart, because understanding that conflict clearly tends to resolve it faster than simply trying to override one side or the other. The mind's job, essentially, is protection through prediction. It scans for risk, weighs likely outcomes, and tries to steer you away from anything that resembles past pain. This is useful, and it has kept you safe more times than you probably realize. But prediction based on the past isn't always accurate about the present. Sometimes the mind flags a situation as dangerous simply because it resembles something painful from years ago, even when the actual present circumstances are entirely different. The heart, by contrast, tends to respond more directly to what's actually here, right now, less burdened by the specific fears the mind has accumulated over a lifetime of trying to keep you safe. This doesn't mean the heart is always right and the mind is always wrong. It means they're doing different jobs, and confusion happens when we expect one to do the job of the other. The mind is excellent at logistics, comparing practical options, thinking through consequences, planning next steps. It is less reliable at telling you what you actually want, underneath all the practical considerations. That's the heart's territory. When you're facing a decision that feels stuck, it's often because you're asking the mind a question only the heart can answer, or asking the heart to solve a problem that actually requires careful, practical planning. Untangling which part of you needs to answer which part of the question tends to unstick things considerably. Let's think through a few common situations where this tension shows up clearly, because I think seeing it named specifically will help you recognize your own version of it more easily. Consider someone deciding whether to leave a job that pays well but leaves them quietly, persistently unfulfilled. The mind will list every practical reason to stay: the salary, the stability, the resume, the sunk years already invested. All of that reasoning is valid. But if the heart has already settled on the truth that this path no longer fits, no amount of practical reasoning will make the discontent disappear. It will simply keep surfacing, in low moods, in Sunday night dread, in a persistent sense of time passing without meaning, until the truth is finally acknowledged rather than argued against. Or consider someone in a relationship that looks fine on paper: no obvious conflict, no clear wrongdoing. Nothing anyone else could point to as a problem, but that leaves them feeling quietly lonely in a way they can't fully explain to friends who see the relationship as stable and good. The mind will often argue that there's nothing concrete to complain about, that dissatisfaction without a clear cause isn't legitimate enough to act on. But the heart doesn't require a bulleted list of grievances to know something is missing. It simply knows, in the quiet, in the specific flavor of loneliness that exists even in company, that something essential isn't being met. That knowing deserves to be taken seriously, even without a tidy explanation attached to it. Or consider someone facing a decision about whether to pursue something they want badly but that carries real risk: starting something new, ending something familiar, moving somewhere unfamiliar. The mind will catalog every risk in vivid detail, because that is precisely what minds are built to do. The heart, meanwhile, might be holding a much simpler, quieter signal underneath all that cataloged risk: this matters to me, and I would regret not trying far more than I would regret the risk of trying and it not working out. That comparison, between the regret of trying and failing versus the regret of never trying at all, is often where the heart's actual position becomes clearest. Once you're willing to ask the question honestly, I want to offer you a slightly different way of listening to your heart, for those of you who find the more abstract, feeling-based approach difficult to access clearly. Try imagining your life 5 years from now, in as much concrete detail as you can manage, under each possible choice you're weighing. Not just the practical outcomes, but the feeling of an ordinary Tuesday morning within each version of that future. Which future's ordinary Tuesday morning does your body relax into more easily as you imagine it? Which one makes something in you exhale, even in your imagination? This exercise tends to bypass the mind's more anxious, present-focused objections and get closer to a felt sense of what actually matters to you over the longer arc of your life. So here's how I'd suggest you hold this over the coming days. Don't force a final decision today, especially if today doesn't feel like the right day for one. But do start paying closer attention to the quiet signals your body has been sending you about this question: the tightness, the ease, the dread, the relief, instead of drowning them out with more analysis than the situation actually requires. Let your heart's answer surface a little more clearly each day, rather than trying to summon it all at once under pressure. I want to acknowledge something honestly here too. Because I don't want to romanticize the heart's knowing as always painless or simple. Sometimes what the heart knows is genuinely hard, that a relationship needs to end even though there's love left in it, that a change needs to be made even though it will disrupt a life that's mostly comfortable, that a fear needs to be faced even though avoiding it has felt safer for a long time. Acknowledging the heart's truth doesn't mean the path forward becomes easy. It just means you stop spending your energy fighting the truth itself, and start directing that same energy toward navigating what comes after acknowledging it. That's a meaningful shift, even when the road ahead remains difficult. There's also something worth saying about the people around you while you're moving through this process, because their opinions, however well-intentioned, can sometimes make it harder to hear your own heart clearly. Well-meaning friends and family often have their own fears, their own investment in your decision going a particular way, their own comfort with the familiar version of your life that a real change would disrupt. Their input matters, and it's worth listening to. But it's also worth remembering that no one else has access to the specific, embodied knowing that only you carry about your own life. Their advice comes from outside, your heart's knowing comes from inside. When those two disagree, it's worth pausing to notice which one you're actually best positioned to trust on this particular question. I also want to gently address the fear of being wrong, because I think it sits underneath a lot of the hesitation to trust the heart's knowing in the first place. What if you follow this feeling and it turns out to be mistaken? What if the relief you feel imagining one path is really just avoidance dressed up as clarity? And the discomfort of the other path was actually the wiser, more mature choice? These are fair questions, and I won't pretend the heart is infallible. But consider this, living by careful, external logic alone hasn't guaranteed certainty either. No decision-making method, heart-based or mind-based, comes with a guarantee. Given that, it's worth asking which approach you can live with more peacefully if it turns out imperfect. A decision made in alignment with what you most deeply felt to be true, or a decision made by overriding that feeling in favor of what seemed safest on paper. Most people, looking back honestly, find more peace with the former, even when it doesn't turn out exactly as hoped. As you move through the coming days with this question, I want to offer a small ritual you might use to keep returning to your heart's knowing without forcing it. Each morning, before the day's noise fully arrives, place a hand gently over your chest and simply ask, quietly, what do you already know? Don't demand an answer in words. Just notice what rises, a feeling, an image, a single clear sentence, or sometimes nothing at all, which is its own kind of information too. Do this for a few mornings in a row, without pressure, without expecting instant clarity. Trust that the answer is already being built, quietly. Beneath the surface of your conscious awareness, the same way it's been building all along, waiting simply for a little more of your attention to fully surface. I want to say something, too, about the relief that tends to follow once a truth like this is finally acknowledged, even before any external action has been taken. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from holding two conflicting positions at once, what your mind keeps arguing and what your heart already knows. And simply admitting to yourself which one is actually true, even privately, even before you're ready to act on it, tends to release a surprising amount of that exhaustion. You don't have to solve everything today. You just have to stop pretending, to yourself, that you don't already know what you know. I think, too, it's worth considering what becomes possible once you stop fighting your own clarity. So often, the energy we spend arguing against what we already know is energy that could otherwise be spent actually moving toward it, gently, at whatever pace feels manageable. The truth your heart is holding isn't an enemy to be defeated through better arguments. It's simply information, offered patiently, waiting for you to be ready to receive it without resistance. I think, too, it's worth considering what becomes possible once you stop fighting your own clarity. So often, the energy we spend arguing against what we already know is energy that could otherwise be spent actually moving toward it, gently, at whatever pace feels manageable. The truth your heart is holding isn't an enemy to be defeated through better arguments. It's simply information, offered patiently, waiting for you to be ready to receive it without resistance. It's also worth saying that clarity, once found, doesn't have to arrive as a dramatic single moment. More often it arrives gradually, like daylight spreading across a room rather than a switch flipping on all at once. You may notice it first as a slight lessening of the internal argument, the mind quieting its objections just a little, the heart's position becoming just slightly harder to ignore. Then, over days or weeks, that slight shift tends to compound, until one day you notice you've actually already decided, somewhere along the way. Without a single dramatic turning point you could point back to. That gradual, undramatic unfolding is often exactly what real clarity looks like, even though it rarely matches the more cinematic version we sometimes expect. If, after everything, you're still uncertain, if the clarity I'm describing hasn't fully surfaced yet, that's alright too. Not every truth arrives on the same timeline, and pressuring yourself to feel certain before you actually do tends to backfire, producing forced conclusions rather than genuine ones. Give it time. Keep returning to the quiet, keep noticing what your body does around this question, keep gently setting aside the noise long enough to let the signal underneath it become clearer. It will come, in its own time, the way clarity usually does, not through force, but through patient, repeated attention. For now, simply notice. Notice what your chest does when the question crosses your mind today. Notice what your shoulders do. Notice whether the thought of one particular path makes you feel, even faintly, like you can finally exhale, and whether the thought of the other makes you feel like you're holding your breath without realizing it. That noticing, repeated gently over the coming days, is usually enough. Your heart already knows the truth. It has been patient with you for a long time, waiting for you to grow quiet enough to hear it. Give it that quiet now. Even just for a few minutes a day, and let it finally speak.